Hello all, hope you're all okay. Hope you've had a nice week with Beethoven's Sixth Symphony and you've downloaded your part and played along and listened to it and looked at Rachel's brilliant videos on string technique. Today is going to be the first in a little series of pieces that I'll talk through, pieces that hopefully we'll do in the coming years. Maybe it's music that you don't know, so it would be kind of new. Maybe it's music that you do know, but just to re-enthuse you about voting for them when we put them down. This is going to be about Nielsen's Fifth Symphony, Carl Nielsen's Fifth Symphony, a fantastic piece, one of the great symphonies in the last 150 years. Definitely worth playing, very challenging, but very, very rewarding to play at the same time. Nielsen was born in 1865, same year as Sibelius in Denmark. He's sometimes kind of lumped together with Sibelius in the same way that Bruckner and Mahler are put together. Slightly convenient, but they don't really particularly sound like each other. Sibelius's route through to the symphony was, his main influence was Tchaikovsky, his first symphonies, but then became a greatly individual composer. Nielsen's route was via Brahms, a bit more Brahmsy. So Sibelius can be a little bit more romantic, a bit more emotional, and Nielsen's music has got a little bit more academic rigour to it. But in the same way, Sibelius, both composers are incredibly adventurous in trying to develop the idea of the symphony, to try and keep this form going, to breathe new life into it, find ways of using tonality to create a big, large-scale piece. They don't do it in the same way, but they both have had enormous success with it and found new paths. Nielsen's Fifth Symphony is probably his best piece. I would say, incredibly powerful piece, very muscular, very gritty, and is a typical piece to show the kind of style that Nielsen writes in. It was written in 1921. I think it was finished off in 1922. It's a two-movement piece, quite a rarity. Schubert 8 symphonies are two movements, but that wasn't by design. It's because he didn't get to finish it. Saint-Saëns organ symphony is only two movements, but that's kind of because the four movements are kind of stuck together. So this is one of the very first pieces that successfully had a way of creating a two-movement form. Nielsen said of the two movements, the first one was passive and the second movement was active. Now that shouldn't imply that the first movement's passivity means nothing much happens. Far from it. It's an incredibly dramatic piece, but the passivity is it doesn't really ever settle anywhere. You never know where you are, and all the action in the second movement isn't always active. It's sometimes very calm and very gentle. He described the piece as like rolling a stone up a hill and all the effort that it takes, and you put the stone eventually at the top and it just sits there, and all the energy that's pent up is kind of released as you push it down the hill again. And that, I think, particularly for the first movement, that kind of effort to try and get it up the hill is really shown in the piece. Now, the beginning of it, the passivity of the beginning is shown really from the very start with the violas. Violas may want to turn away for a little bit because you might not like to hear what I'm going to now say. The violas play the same thing for 18 bars, the same two notes, A and C, and you just keep going and keep going and keep going, and after 18 bars you have a gap and then you do it again. But it's worth it. So the opening bit is the violas sticking on their A and C, and they're joined eventually by bassoons, horns and flutes, and this will just give some idea of what this passivity means. There's an incredible tension that starts to brew, but you just don't feel that you've got anywhere. So I'll try and play and talk through at the same time. So violas start, and eventually bassoons will join. There's bassoons. then the horns and the flutes. And I'll just say a few things about what's happened there. When the horns come in, they're in D major. So we kind of think, oh, D major, very nice. When the flutes come in, they're in C major. And previously, the bassoon line is in C flat major, and they land on a B flat. The violas are playing C and A, which could be F, could be A minor, could be a kind of C6 chord, could be D minor, could be anything. And as you can hear with this language, we don't know whether it's happy music, sad music, we just don't really know. It could be anywhere, and there's these amazing clashes of intervals, although there's a lot of triads. So this just kind of gradually dies away, this effort, this thought just comes to nothing particularly. And just dies away. But still the violas keep going. But as it dies away, they come up with something that is very, very relevant to later on. And just comes out of nowhere. And this is a little motif that Nielsen described as the evil motif. It's got a lot of relevance into what goes on. A little bit of a disturbance. One of the things Nielsen another thing he spoke about, he's great talking about his music actually, really helpful. Sometimes a little bit enigmatic what he says. But he said it's like going for a walk and you're not really thinking of anything, and then suddenly a thought comes into your head and it grows. And as with nature, things can start to grow and will get bigger, but there's going to be some destructive forces trying to stop that growth. And this really encapsulates that thought. A thought has happened and we die away. A new motif comes in, a new tune. This time the first violins have it. I can't quite play all of it, but I'll do the important bits. So the violas, what the violas had, the third, the violins take that and extend it a little bit, extend the evil motif into a big tune. Beautiful, beautiful line, and in between, the bit I can't play, second violins and violas just have a little, just keep the chord, but you can hear with the cellos just staying exactly the same. So there's an inertia there, there's a passion and a tension, but there's also an inertia, and it hasn't really, it just wants to go somewhere, but doesn't feel it's making any progress. Dies away. The evil motif comes in with the winds, this time in fourths. Very, very sinister, but at the same time quite nice. Then a further development, some very useful motifs for later on. This is the violins again, first violins, but this time in octaves, and some sinister stuff in the cellos. This is important. And underneath all that, keeps going. It just slightly changes, but again, it hasn't really gone anywhere. But there's some important figures. That will be used later on to build up. But once again, it tries to do something but doesn't make it. And then sinister, even more sinister things happen. That line is just developed in the strings. And as it dies away, we suddenly hear a side drum, dun 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 dun, right in the distance, and this kind of military music starts up, a military march. And as it builds, we have cellos, basses, and timps, and a really military march from the violins. Incredibly dramatic, but that kind of dies away, and we're taken over by some fantastic woodwind writing for the flute and the clarinet. Some really wailing sounds, but it's this third is related to the violas down there, and it doesn't go anywhere. It stays exactly the same, rooted to the spot. All this kind of destruction is happening around, but we're just completely stuck. Gradually the motif of this is developed into like a triplet thing, which is a kind of relevance, because eventually we do settle down to a C in the bass, and this time violas have developed into a, and then we have the first music comes back. Feel as though we're getting somewhere. It feels a little bit more calm, a nicer kind of texture. But eventually, that lovely texture, we keep changing our pedal notes. These long range pedal notes, and there's tension, but still kind of stuck, and that tension gradually dies away, and there's more wailing from the winds, fantastic writing, and eventually, as things die away, we'll hear the violins just gently ticking away on this D, with everything that's going on underneath, in different pedals, just trying to find its place, but this suddenly becomes the constant. There's a thing that Tove used to say, that if you play a note over and over and over again, it'll eventually sound like the dominant rather than the tonic. So here's a D. Eventually, you're going to be hearing it as you'll eventually want to get to a G. It's maybe to do with the harmonic series, but it's quite an uncanny thing. It does lead your ear that way, and Nielsen can take advantage of this. This D goes on and on and on, and we kind of think, what is there? There's destruction, everything dies away, and then finally, we have this amazing music. The first kind of major key, the first settling of anything, which in a sense is the slow movement, and as a thank you gift to the violas for all their repetition, the tune is given to the violas with a little introduction from the oboe. fantastic tune, absolutely beautiful, and so suddenly we've arrived somewhere, a bit of respite. The tune is taken up by the full orchestra in this wonderful orchestration, really full, lovely sound. Goes to B major eventually. Now we'll remember the B major, the route from G major up the major third from Beethoven, B flat to D, and here, although there's preparation to get to B major, it has this same kind of sun coming out effect, and we just feel we've kind of arrived. But we have another restatement, this time in the violins, just the same calmness. We have the evil motif that starts to nibble away at our comfort, and nibble away it does, and it puts everything off in this lovely tune. It's just sitting there, ready to destroy all this beauty that we've suddenly made. We now come to the build up to this massive climax. Trombones, the entry of the trombones. Trombones have been silent up to now. We have a little a cadence that is very typically Nielsen. And we have a brass chorale in this time G minor. And there's a battle starts to ensue between the woodwinds, who do the evil motif based on D, and the strings, who do the evil motif based on C. So we've got a pull in different directions, and the brasses don't know what to do. They go through all sorts of keys, and it's starting to be a little bit uncomfortable, and then the worst comfort of all comes, the side drum comes back in, and it's marked to be completely on its own time. And in the part in the original score, it says you play as loud and as out of time to try and put the orchestra off completely, to destroy the sound of the orchestra. It's really loud. The Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra version is just absolutely fantastic, because the side drum is loud and it makes the orchestra get louder and louder as to what to do. But I can't quite emulate what actually happens. I'll try. I haven't got enough hands. But you'll hear this battle between the C's and the D's, and just imagine the side drum going on at the same time. But it comes out to this most enormous climax of 3 Fs, just to kind of get us back to where we want to be. So. It really feels as though we've kind of got all the forces, the evil forces have kind of gone. We have a little bit of bassoon with the evil motif. we have the flute with the evil motif as well, and then we rest on this absolutely lovely string chord at the end. Oh. And the chord just sits there, and what better instrument to finish us off than a clarinet? And the clarinet has this absolutely beautiful cadenza on top of this string chord that's just kind of sitting there. In the background, the side drummer's now gone off stage and just doing dum, diddly, dum, 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 further and further away, and hopefully out of our lives for good. Absolutely fantastic ending to the movement. Just thinking about what's happened is like this wreckage of the movement. Lovely, we've come through it. Lovely ending, but just remembering what we've been through. So that's the passive movement. Second movement is the active one. Very gritty, very active and very strong and fast, very hard. It's like a scherzo movement. There's a scherzo and two sections in the middle, two fugues, very different, and then the scherzo music comes back at the end. The scherzo music is just really lively and goes on and on and on and on, building and building and building, and there's loads of little motifs that we'll recognise from before. One of the particularly important ones is after the first statement, as it calms down, we have the oboe. This very, very useful motif. It's very similar to that we heard in the first movement, this kind of organic movement of use of material that we've had in previous movements that's always changing, always evolving. But that has a great use later on. Gradually this music gets really, really muscular, really loud, really, really vibrant, dies down, and then we have a really annoying bit for the strings. Fortunately all the strings are together, so it's like safety in numbers, if you like. I'll just play the little bit that you've got slowly. Etc, 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 and it goes on for bars and bars. It's much faster, and it just kind of dances away quietly in the background, and on top of that we have From All the Winds. It's just a development of what the oboe has played. and it gets in itself on a right old knot. Gradually, all the whole orchestra comes in, and strings can't really decide what to do. The energy gets more pent up, and suddenly we get into triplets. That doesn't work. It goes back to and that doesn't work, and so it gradually gets slower and slower down to fours. And we have threes and fours at the same time. Just can't really get itself settled at all. And then we come back to music that is almost like you would imagine to be in the first movement, completely passive. It's the flute and oboe playing D, and the strings playing A flat, and D and A flat are kind of the opposite ends of the key system. So we've kind of got back into our kind of world of the first movement, not really having a clue where we are. And eventually things settle down onto a C chord, and in some ways quite a funny moment. And in the same spirit of that repeated note, we're going to be going in. This is the dominant key, so we're on C. So it's kind of insistent. Everything stops. Insistent that this is going to be the dominant, and an absolutely brilliant, like circus moment getting into the next bit. We have a fugue, and it sounds as though it's going to be a laugh, but it is most definitely not a laugh. Very, very fast, very difficult fugue, which builds up, and it's almost as if the energy is just too much for it to cope. Never knows where it is. All sorts of keys. There's a stretto where the entries are right close through the brass. Big loud chords. Wonderful bit of clarinet writing yet again. Loads of wild wind writing. And eventually we end up on this B flat minor chord with the horns taking this big line, and we're left with a flute just pleading away that something's got to happen. We're left on a D flat and a B. Could really only go there. But Nielsen being Nielsen and being the 20th century, you don't want to have what you expect. You want to have unpleasantness and unexpectedness. There's a beautiful poetic fugue in F minor. But we do notice this music, the notes are exactly the same as the beginning scherzo music from the first music, exactly the same, but just put into a completely different context. And some of the music is very, very Shostakovich-y in its intensity. The strings are quite high up, and this is just the third entry for the violas. Amazing intense music, amazingly intense music. Very, very, very beautiful, very poetic, fantastic stuff. Then we have this really incandescent sound in the strings, which is the oboe again, but this time with these really loud strings high up. passionate and so emotional and so yearny. So intense does it get that the only way out is to go back to that scherzo music again, and eventually we get back to what we had at the beginning. And the same, it's almost like a recapitulation in a kind of sonata form. It's about as close as to sonata it gets. And then we have this build-up, this incredible build-up towards the end. We still don't really know where we're going to be, where we are. It's just so uncomfortable because of all these opposing forces just trying to put us off and destroy what we've got. But Nielsen, being an incredible believer in the will, the human spirit, and the will of survival, he'd obviously gone through a lot in his life. The world had gone through a lot in its life because of the First World War, and as a kind of way of showing how the human spirit can fight through everything, will just continue. There is nothing better than this music. There's a kind of will to get to the end, to get somewhere, and the end, when we finally reach it, is just such a wonderful, uplifting moment, without being triumphal like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The C major chords just hammered away that we've won. Almost. This isn't like that at all. We've come through a difficult patch, a very difficult patch that would have been really, really troublesome to deal with. Another patch will harm us, we're sure, but for the moment we've come through. Certainly brilliant as a metaphor for a man going through all his heart troubles. Certainly brilliant for the world coming after the First World War, and I would say certainly brilliant for now and all the distress and worry that the coronavirus has caused across the world. This uplifting music it just really makes your heart sing. I'm just going to play the last little bit for you as best I can. You'll hear the oboe tune yet again, but put into slightly distorted ways by the winds. Underneath, the strings have their chuntering going on, but eventually things start to arrive. But the thing that is in the background is the brass. Have these B flats and this insistence on B flat, this Toviesk idea that this is going to be the dominant. Will we get there? And the insistence and the gradually drawing in of everybody to this B flat, that this is where we're going to be, this is what's going to take us to our final tonic, is absolutely amazing. The fight between the winds and the strings is just an incredible moment. I'll try my best at the end, but you'll hear where we get to on the final chords. Great build-ups to a last chord you can imagine. Nielsen wrote to his daughter just towards the end of his life that he'd done as best as he can with his composing, but he didn't know if it would be of any use to anyone. Well, I would say completely opposite to this piece. Totally useful for the uplift for the human spirit in such times as we're in now. I'd thoroughly recommend listening to it. Just sitting in a darker room, just put the volume up loud and listen to one of the great symphonies, and certainly consider to choose it for the future, because it's just an amazing piece to play and to listen to. Download the part again. Watch the digital console. Try and get to know it as best you can, and look at the other Nielsen symphonies as well. See you next week. Good luck.